Okay, so you could cure almost all of this planet's current woes by doing just one thing: getting rid of money. Most people look at me like I've gone stark raving mad when I suggest this, but it's not even that original an idea. In fact, it's one of the foundations of the Federation from Star Trek.
They don't use money in the 23rd century.
Well, we don't.
Money doesn't exist in the 24th century.
No money? You mean you don't get paid?
The acquisition of wealth is no longer the driving force in our lives.
But more than that, if you did it tomorrow, 70% of the planet wouldn't even notice. You think some African farmer or Madagascan vanilla harvester is constantly using his credit card to buy lattes? No, of course he's not. He's either farming or going into trees to get his produce. And once a week or once a month, he goes to sell his wares or buy new equipment, if he can afford such a luxury. And only then would he notice the swap. The sad truth is that the vast majority of the world would be oblivious if you got rid of money, because money is not used as intended anymore. It's not a trading tool, it's a stratification of society tool. But getting rid of money, you say? It's a stupid idea. Well, it sounds like it, but I bet you want the same thing. You just haven't put that thought into those kinds of words. And I can prove it. Think about the lottery. Unless you're incredibly greedy, if you win the lottery, you don't want the 200 or 300 million lottery win. You'd happily take the 20 million lottery win. Why? Because you want to win just enough money so that you and yours never have to worry about money again. Right? And that is exactly the same thought as me. You want rid of money as an oppressive tool in your local life. I've just expanded my thought to include everyone. In a world without money, no human has to work for a living. You work because you have a passion for something or because you want to. Everything is automated. And the strange thing is, that goal is far, far more simply achieved than you could ever imagine. But to want to change from one system to another, you first have to accept there's a reason for doing so. There's an old adage that history repeats itself. There's a boom, then a bust, a rebellion by the masses, changing of leaders, and then some kind of conflict that leads to the next boom. And luckily, being born in the 70s, I'm part of the first technological generation of mankind. That means my history has been recorded in TV and news media, so those repetitions can be seen and relived.
These are hard times. 17 years ago, Harold Macmillan won an election on the slogan, "You've never had it so good." But the easy affluence that made such a claim possible has long since disappeared.
Okay, let's start with what's really important tonight. It's just your money, not your life. Everybody who really loved you a week ago still loves you tonight. And that's a heck of a lot more important than the numbers on a brokerage statement.
This is going to be one of the watershed days in financial markets history.
It was a manic Monday in the financial markets. The Dow tumbled more than 500 points after two pillars of the street tumbled over the weekend.
Good evening. It is a day that will be in bold print in history books. Black Monday, October 19th, 1987, when the stock market went into a free fall, losing more in one day than it did on Black Tuesday in 1929.
The whole deal was kept sub rosa because it didn't look good on Wall Street for Ebers to sell WorldCom stock. So the superbank devised a scheme to help Ebers convert his WorldCom wealth into hard assets. Don't sell stock, take a loan.
Is fine. Do not take your money out. This is real. If there's one takeaway other than a plus 400 somewhere, Bear Stearns is not in trouble. I mean, if anything, they're more likely to be taken over. Don't move your money from Bear. That's just being silly.
Meanwhile, Merrill Lynch, fearing it could be next, agreed in an act of desperation to a shotgun marriage with Bank of America. With 60,000 employees, had been battered by nearly $50 billion in mortgage-related losses. Veteran trader Art Cashin believes there could be more casualties.
This is the fifth time we've seen this movie. And you sit on the edge of your seat and you yell at whichever character it is, don't go into that woodshed. But they keep going in.
The companies repeatedly gave AAA ratings to investments they knew included risky subprime loans.
Loan officers would falsify customers' job or financial information so they could qualify for mortgages.
Virtually every major Wall Street institution was involved in reckless, irresponsible, and illegal behavior which led to the great crash of 2008.
And there are tough years to come, because the Alt-A and Option R mortgages were bundled into Wall Street securities and sold to investors.
In a nutshell, 2009 looks like what to you?
Miserable.
2010.
Miserable, even worse.
Your company is now bankrupt, our economy is in a state of crisis, but you get to keep $480 million. I have a very basic question for you. Is this fair?
The gulf of inequality between the big banks and just about everyone else. They've clearly struck a chord, and not just in the US. Similar protests have now been seen in 900 cities around the world. In London, demonstrators have been camped outside St. Paul's for 9 days.
People all across the country working in jobs once considered middle class, but now living far below a middle class lifestyle. How did this dramatic income inequality happen on such a wide scale? And what can be done about it?
Well, Brian, so concerned are we to build a better Australia?
You helped build a worse America.
Yeah, well, that was an accident, Brian. What we were doing was investing in the international investment market.
And that's been a disaster.
It, frankly, famously, hasn't been a huge success hitherto.
The 2008 financial crash was just unlike anything that had come before it. It took down governments, laid waste to multiple economies, and cost the taxpayers of the planet upwards of $12 trillion, a figure that is still climbing today. The one good to come from it was that the world got a supercharged education in modern economics. We also got to see the grubby little secrets and tactics of the world's financial institutions laid bare. And I think people finally realised that concentrated money has a way of working against the majority for the benefit of the minority. There's no greater example I can give of this than the practices of the heads of Goldman Sachs during 2008. So, 1 month before the collapse of Bear Stearns, but 2 weeks after the private emergency meeting that took place with the Federal Reserve into the true state of the US economy and the liquidity of the banks themselves, the board of Goldman Sachs successfully applied for and changed their banking status. That's the type of bank they fundamentally are, from investment to commercial. Why? Because investment banks, they had been told, would not be bailed out by the Fed, and commercial banks would. That one change, made in a way that was oblivious to many people in the US and done before the collapse was underway, cost the US taxpayer around $100 billion in bailouts, of which $27 billion was later paid out in bonuses within that company, about 6.2 going directly to board members. And that has to be the biggest question from the crash. Where was the failure for those people? Those banks took risks with your money, lost it, and then got you to bail them out from your now empty pockets, only to be able to lend that money back to you again with interest to keep that rotten model going. Imagine a pharmaceutical company doing the same thing as it went under. Unless you give us $6 trillion, there'll be no more chemotherapy meds, no more painkillers, no more insulin. Pay up or start watching people die. They would have sent the military in. But oh no, not the bankers. You can't touch the city of Wall Street. We need them. It's strange. There's this hatred, it almost seems like, of socialism in America. This idea that capitalism restrained for the benefit of the masses is an intrinsically evil idea in some way, that somehow socialism and communism are the same thing. And therefore it's incredibly ironic that American capitalism, which goes out of its way to attack and vilify socialism whenever and wherever it can, was saved by the largest single act of socialism in the history of mankind. Socialism saved capitalism. The other thing that seems to have happened all over the world is that capitalism and democracy appear to be thought of as the same thing. But one is an economic model and the other is a form of governance. I think people forget that democracy built the West, not capitalism, and the standards of living that you enjoy in the West gained traction during the Industrial Revolution in the UK. The abolishment of slavery, no more child labour, reversal of poor laws, and the closing of debtors' prisons. British capitalism and industrial expansion was tempered by its socialism. Yes, you can get as rich as you want, but only if you begin to treat those around you equitably. To give an example of that, Titus Salt made ludicrous amounts of money from his mills in the north of England, but he also built houses for all his workers, paid for schools, hospitals, theatres and churches to go with them. He knew he had a responsibility to his workers because they were the ones that made him rich. Can you imagine Jeff Bezos doing this? 100 billion in the bank, and he argues over paying minimum wage or letting people have paid holidays. With all the billionaires we have, where is this century's Titus Salt? Modern capitalism is just greed rebranded, and everybody knows it. The strangest thing of all is that we're really proud of our democracies in the West, but we probably don't live in them anymore. We probably live in a plutocracy. All you have to do is look at the definitions and think about how your government organises itself to realise that somewhere along the way, democracy disappeared and plutocracy took its place. There's a discourse called The Fall of Empires by a British general and historian, Sir John Bagot Glubb. It's a great name. There was a famous quote that the further back you look, the further forward you are likely to see. And during his time in the army, he became fascinated by the ruins of the empires that once inhabited the lands he visited. So he decided to investigate them and found that all of them, every one, lasted between 200 and 300 years, without exception. But the thing that was truly remarkable about his research was that he discovered that all of these empires, regardless of when or where they existed, had a describable life cycle with key similarities and events that marked them all. In the years since, other people's research and investigations have showed that the rise and fall of every empire is marked by 7 specific stages. It's probably easiest to show those by looking at the one empire that everybody knows best, the Roman Empire. The first phase is that of the pioneers, the people who found and expand the empire, settling new lands and marking territories. The second phase comes shortly after and is a time of conquests, when, in order to continue to expand, new land and resources must be taken by force, like the invasion of Gaul. The third phase is one of commerce, when the burgeoning empire begins to be able to suffice its own needs and wealth begins to pour in through trade. This is usually the era in which the great infrastructure achievements of an empire are built. Roman examples would be aqueducts and civic buildings. Affluence marks the fourth phase, and this is usually a time of the glorification of a civilization, as those leaders alive at the time make edifices to mark the empire's greatness. At the same time, the social needs of an empire begin to become a factor, and your empire usually splits into 2, those of a social disposition and those of a trade or wealth accumulation disposition. The fifth phase is that of intellect, sometimes referred to as the time of squandered opportunity. This phase can be very brief or very elongated, depending on which internal faction wins out the last phase. Either way, this phase usually ends destructively, with intellect being shunned, sometimes altogether, by its end. Decadence comes next, and entering this phase is the death knell for an empire. We all know what decadence looks like, and the Romans did it better than most. But this phase is really marked by the sudden influx of immigrants and an emerging pessimism about the future of the empire and the populace. The last phase is that of decline and collapse. In Rome, this meant that the infrastructure of the empire, like aqueducts and roads, was being left to rot, civic staff went unpaid, and governmental interference began to emerge in programmed schooling and the quelling of political dissident. And this erosion of the foundation of the empire eventually led to governmental bickering and this sudden fear of immigrants in the populace.
Have you heard what is being proposed? Gaius Metellus Livius has asked that we, the Roman Senate, should give these barbarians, these savages, Roman citizenship and settle them on Roman land. To treat these wandering murderers as brothers, equals. And what of our other provinces? What of Gaul, so loyal to us? What of Syria and Egypt, which sends us our grain? If we make Romans of these barbarians, can we withhold Roman citizenship from them? No. Then what becomes of the precious prize Roman citizenship once was? It becomes a cheap, common thing to be given away like bread. know.
And all the while, there's this orgy of the rich going on who are suddenly fascinated by sex and who somehow think that their money will protect them from the end. And there's this other group who are actively promoting the collapse in order to profit from it.
Get me gold, Cleander. Strip all the public monuments, the temples, the gods and goddesses. Get me enough gold, Cleander, to drown Livius and his new Rome.
And there's these huge distractions for the populace going on, like gladiatorial arenas and the Romans celebrated gluttony around food. And the society as a whole keeps cycling round the plug hole, going through these short-lived death rattle events as Caesar's desperately tried to kickstart the empire and bring it back to its former glory.
This war of Caesar's is a crime. He's waging war on behalf of Rome. We commissioned him to fight the Gauls. Not all of them. He started fighting the insurgents at the borders and moved on to murder.
And each attempt lasts less and less time. Boom, bust, upheaval, new leader. Until the Roman Empire eventually collapsed under the weight of what it once was. Rotten from within and hated from without. And how is any of that different from today? All you have to do is look at the US-led Western Empire. So, take the real pioneers of the US, people like Davy Crockett and Daniel Boone. Let's be nice and say that the US Empire's 200 to 300 year life cycle started in 1775, Westward Ho, etc. The conquest of the lands of the Indians came shortly afterwards as people pushed further and further west. The era of commerce started at the beginning of the 20th century, with railroads and oil providing much of the driving force. From there, the era of affluence began, with some of the wealthiest families of the modern era starting out in America in the late 20s and early 30s, and the rise of advertising emerging as public finances swelled after the war.
Looks like somebody's been doing some shopping, and that means somebody's been doing a lot of walking and getting more and more worn out, because by the time a woman assembles a complete spring wardrobe, she's generally covered a lot of floor space in a lot of stores.
The American era of intellect has so many notable figures, it's difficult to name them all, but Einstein and Kennedy would probably be the markers of the near end of that phase.
Let the word go forth from this time and place to friend and foe alike that the torch has been passed to a new generation of Americans born in this century, tempered by war, disciplined by a hard and bitter peace, proud of our ancient heritage, and unwilling to witness or permit the slow undoing of those human rights to which this nation has always been committed.
Into the era of decadence with home appliances, MTV, and the wealth of the baby boomers on show. And the trickle of immigrants that was coming into the US suddenly starts to turn into a flood. And before you can blink, you're into the death rattle. Gladiator combat, celebrity chefs, fascination with women and sex, materialism, fear of immigrants, rotting infrastructure, pessimism, hated on all sides. Boom and bust, over and over again. When ancient empires collapsed, a darkness settled over the regions they previously encompassed that sometimes took centuries to get over. The fall of the Roman Empire probably caused the Dark Ages in Europe, which lasted 300 years. Just imagine, in a world of globalization, what will happen when the US empire inevitably falls. In both examples, that cycle of empire rise and fall is driven by the flow of money through the empire, each one of those phases marking when the flow shifted in a different direction. And the statistics surrounding the flow of money through our modern empire and the inference that can be gleaned from that impact and what will be felt by its collapse is eye-opening. According to conventional wisdom, you shouldn't be spending more than 30% of your income on accommodation, be it rent or mortgage. So, to get a gauge of how skewed that picture is, you need to take a look at average weekly salary from, say, 1980 to today. Then, if you take a look at the average rents over the same period, you see a relatively similar upward trend. And finally, redraw that salary line, making sure that 30% ratio is preserved. And suddenly it becomes clear there is a massive discrepancy in the system that's only getting worse. To see this gap more clearly, take a look at inflation rates during this same period. And then if you have a look at average wage increases, they're mostly flat against even some fairly high inflation rates. Then have a look at the average wage increases for the handful at the top. It's disgraceful. If you take a look at a chart of US population, then mark on that the number of citizens in poverty, which is classed as being unable to afford adequate housing and food. And then add to that figure those in near poverty, which is having no disposable income at all, or being what we call as on the breadline. Then you can see how this discrepancy is affecting the people of the US. This is America, the wealthiest nation on earth, the land of opportunity, and 48% of its populace are either starving and cold or one missed paycheck from it. There was a measurement devised in the 70s that shows inequality called the 1 in a million scale, which measures the respective wealth and wealth generation capability of the top 1 in a million people in a country. That's 0.00001% versus everybody else as a percentage. If you look at that graph for the US and globally, you'll scare yourself to death. Looking back through the data, I think they were able to recreate that graph back from the early 50s. And early on, that top 0.00001% barely register as controlling any of the wealth. Maybe 2 or 3% in the US, but marginal globally. And then as the 50s draw to a close, you just see the first stirrings of an upward trend. The graph levels out for a few years in the 60s, and you can feel the influence of the leaders of the time holding it back. And then it drives into the 70s, and the graph starts to accelerate. There's another little pause around the end of the 80s, fall of the Berlin Wall and Black Monday. And then the march really picks up pace. It wobbles around .com, but then keeps going. And you expect to dip in 2008, but there's nothing. And now the line is unchecked and climbing so fast, the wealth of the rest of the world is beginning to pale. And you end up with 1 in a million people. That's just 7,500 individuals around the world controlling 58% of the wealth and its wealth generating capability. And in the US, that's just 330 people controlling 49%. And you wonder why there's so much inequality and why politicians don't listen to you. And that one graph explains it all. You see, the system we have in place is a pyramid scheme. All governments run off of structural debt. It's way too boring and complicated to get into, but effectively it's a debt you really never pay off. You simply service it, pay its interest. What that means is as long as there are more people paying tax tomorrow than today, you can borrow large sums, and the more people tomorrow make it easier to service that debt and thus allow you to spend more tomorrow, as there'll be even more to service that debt the day after, and so on. What you are doing is forward-loading the debt onto tomorrow's populace. Here's the end of the line for that particular method of accounting. Human population. Since 1700, human population has only done one thing: go up. And fast. It was originally predicted that this population would only ever go up, and all our issues would come from overpopulation. But it appears that was wrong. The current analysis shows that population growth is slowing and will eventually peak at about 12 billion. Here's the kicker. If the economies of the world are built with structural debt requiring expansion forever, and you are not going to get that, who's going to service the debts in the future? There's not going to be enough people. Your model is fundamentally broken, and its collapse is therefore inevitable. Imagine a Neanderthal living in Northern Europe 20,000 years ago. There's only 5 things he needs to ensure he and his family live in warmth and comfort. Fresh water, food, a place to live away from the elements, clothing for warmth and protection, and a source of energy, firewood. Just 5 things. Now, imagine that one day, by some miracle or another, he invents a machine that provides those 5 things for him. Tell me at which point after that he invents money. He's not going to sit there with everything he needs and do anything but sit around with his family or create the occasional luxury. He's not going to create money, then lumber himself with self-imposed debt and then invent the jobs required to pay those debts off. Money was invented to allow for trade and the valuation of tradable goods to happen in as fair and problem-free manner as possible. But trade itself was only needed so that societies could gather the 5 essentials of life in order to survive. If you have those 5 things, you don't need money. And this is the real trick. Given the right impetus to create the technologies required to automate those 5 things, we don't need money. Its usefulness in bridging a trade gap until we had the technological tools required for our survival has come to an end. "67% of the world's surface is covered in water, but only 3% of that is fresh water. You take into account that Greenland, the Arctic and Antarctic and all the ice that's stored there account for 70% of all of that fresh water, and there really isn't a massive amount left to share around. That makes it scarce and thus profitable. With money, you get situations like Mexico City, where megacorporations get to buy up the local water sources and force the native residents to buy their bottled water to survive. Or like central London, where water companies will fine people for watering their gardens in summer and tell people to shower less often to save resources, but then in the same breath lose 20% of the water supply to leaks they refuse to fix due to the cost. With money, you put tap water in bottles and sell it for profit, whilst the wastewater bottles pile up in the Pacific and pollute millions of square kilometres of oceans. Money stops desalination plants being built in the most arid areas on Earth and prevents third world countries from supplying the necessities of life to their citizens. Without money, a leak is a problem to be fixed, and municipal water sources don't get sold for profit. Desalinisations are built where they are needed, when they are needed. If more reservoirs are required in an area, they are created, because land is not more profitable turned into a housing development or an airport. Dams are constructed, and technological progress focuses on water conservation and not profit margins. Most freshwater treatment and pumping is already part of automated systems, so very little effort would be needed to making them fully automated. And thus water becomes what it should be, a necessity of life provided for all, not a coveted resource withheld from those who cannot afford it. Without money, nobody's children die of thirst in the street for lack of it ever again. Most food production on Earth is manual, and it's manual for one reason only. The technology to automate it is too expensive. With money, most farmers can't afford drought or insect-resistant crops. They can't afford GPS-directed ploughs or harvesters, can't buy herbicides or fertilizers, can't afford the wells and water troughs required to get good yields. With money, fish stocks on the verge of collapse are still plundered as scarcity drives prices upward. Unwanted fish are tossed overboard rather than being taken to market. Expensive fish farming habitats are not set up as they are cost prohibitive, and nurseries and protected zones are few and far between as their cost-benefit curves don't quite match shareholders' expectations. Land animals are kept in horrific conditions because of money to maximise yield per square unit. They're fed substandard meal and even their own kind in order to keep costs down. With money, 70% of what we grow is fed to the animals we eat, because meat is worth more than grain, and the harmful side effects of animal husbandry are externalised, creating ocean dead zones and increasing the rate of deforestation as we chase a dollar. In a society driven by money, a person can starve to death 10 feet from a bin where wasteful supermarkets dump 15% of what lines their shelves every day. Children go hungry in the West, their parents forced to go to food banks even though they have both worked 40 hours a week, whilst consumer food wastage runs at nearly 20%. Without money, animals are reared humanely. Technologies to produce artificial meats are chased with vigour, and the oceans are set up to maximise yields and protect stocks rather than pay dividends. Ploughs, harvesters and sowers are easily automated with the technologies we have available, and mechanised farmed fisheries almost become the norm. Without money, self-driving vehicles deliver food directly to where you want it, or take it to stores where machines put it on shelves. No people involved. You just turn up and take what you want. Without money, nobody starves, because staying alive doesn't have a cost. There are 10 empty houses for every homeless person in the UK, and nearly 70% of all homeless people will either die or suffer serious long-term injuries because of sleeping rough. You can't say your society works and allow that to continue. We can 3D print houses now, in room-sized blocks, all the cabling, all the pipework, all fully insulated. Like full-scale Lego. We can build houses for anyone, for any need, to suffice anything that we want them to do, whenever we choose. Why is it so expensive again? All new houses will be built using recyclable materials, so when they are not needed, the resources go back into the pool. Also, where you live becomes your choice. You want to live in Monaco? Sure, go live there. If it gets too busy because everyone has the same idea, move somewhere else. You don't own anywhere, you just book its usage for periods of time. If you decide you want to stay somewhere for the rest of your life, do so. Book it forever. If you change your mind and move on, it becomes free and someone else can use it, or its materials go back into the pool. In a world without money, population centres change all the time. Cities become less crowded and other areas become busier. Everyone gets one main residence and can short stay in custom-built hotels anywhere they want, whenever they want. And don't say, what if a place is fully booked? That's not a reason why this doesn't work. The same issue exists with money. It's just without money, if a place is oversubscribed, you build more to meet demand. It's fully recyclable, so you're not wasting resources. It doesn't matter. All shortages would be short-lived at best. You can't say that about money systems. We automated the production of clothing nearly 250 years ago, starting with the invention of the spinning jenny in 1770. People called Luddites would famously torch mills across England as the machines came and took away their livelihoods in the name of progress. Machines, invented to make clothes more efficiently, replaced humans. This is the myth of mechanisation at its finest, and one of the greatest lies of money there is. If you took the advances in engineering around the production of clothing and extrapolated them, clothing should have been completely automated and practically cost-free about 50 years ago. But progress in science is expensive. So if you're greedy and rich, you don't spend lots of money on advancement, you spend very little money on moving your production to Southeast Asian sweatshops and get children to produce your clothing for a fraction of the cost of machines. Without money in the mix, we automate clothing production in very little time whatsoever. It could even become like a print-on-demand service. You either pick a design or provide a design of your own, and it is made and shipped to you immediately. Literally, the only thing stopping this being the norm today is greed. My word, we have to fix this, and fast. As anyone in the business world will tell you, all your money is made in endgame. Think about the oil industry. All the prospecting and the production of the well equipment and the surveying and the pipelines and the offshore rigs and the refineries and the tankers, they all cost money, therefore cut into your bottom line in the beginning. So, even though hideous profits were made in oil so far, they are dwarfed by the money that will be made in endgame. The infrastructure is built, the scarcity is increasing, which drives up the price, which in turn magnifies your profits. In a society driven by money, we will burn every last milliliter of oil that can be gotten to, come hell or high water. There is simply too much money at stake to allow anything else to occur, whether its usage destroys us or not. The amount of technologies that are bought up and shelved by energy companies or even suppressed and discredited so that the petroleum, coal and gas giants can keep profits rolling in is abhorrent. But we know there are better ways. The UK recently had 3 days only using fully renewable electricity. No fossil fuels at all. And that's what we have to move to. And this is where one of those things that needs to happen alongside getting rid of money comes into effect. You need the keys to the patent jar. We need to get the very best ideas, the very best designs, and we need to get everyone using them all the time. In a world without money, all ideas don't have a value other than to humanity as a whole, so protecting them to only be used by a chosen few becomes ridiculous. So we mine the patent jar for the best ideas and everything becomes electric. The sun delivers more power to the earth in a day than humans currently utilise in a year. We only need a fraction of that to power everything. With money, that conversion takes a century, if there's a willingness to even get there. Without money, it becomes priority number 1, and we could get the job done in 10 years at most. No more increases in CO2, no more oil spills, no more fracking for natural gas, no more strip mining for coal. Just solar, and occasionally wind, tidal and geothermal where most effective. If you then back the solar electricity off with hydrogen as a liquid fuel to replace jet fuels and certain special needs, as hydrogen is created by electrically splitting water and only produces water and no CO2 when burned, we fix the fossil fuel problem and save the planet for future generations. This idea is that strange to most people that they simply can't get their heads around how all of it would work. I get a lot of blank stares, a lot of questions about what people would use for money instead of money, which makes no sense at all. But mostly, it just tends to make people angry. I think people believe that in some way, getting rid of money will allow lazy people to do nothing, and they feel that this is a grossly unfair scenario. And I have to point out that without money, who actually cares who is lazy or not? Because it doesn't affect your life at all. And it's only with money that the issue exists. I can see why people think it is unfair for some people to get everything they need for nothing in a society where the majority of the population is forced to work to earn the money required to survive. Only by getting rid of money, however, do you solve that problem. Not by keeping it. So, whenever I've discussed this idea with people, I have these types of issues thrown at me as reasons why it wouldn't work, and broadly they can be placed into 2 categories. Things I haven't mentioned yet, as the idea covers every single component of society, and sometimes you just can't cover the ground, so people think you are purposefully not discussing something because it won't work. And that's just not true. It's just that I haven't got to it yet. The second is what I've come to call arguments from greed, issues I can tell would only be caused by people who are personally or purposefully being selfish by doing the things they are doing. And these are the things that exist in money-driven societies more often than they exist in worlds without money, and so simply can't be justifiable reasons for why something can't work. Otherwise, they are a reason in opposition to themselves. All I can ever do is try to explain the benefits of each scenario and then ask people to think about whether their opposition to it is a misunderstanding or whether they are still thinking about the subject from a monetary point of view. This is a tricky one because ownership is so intrinsically linked to our way of life in the West. And this is where people really need to think about a world where there is no money. We hold the concept of ownership dear because the things we own hold value in a monetary system. In a world without money, you would still have stuff and things would still belong to you. but you wouldn't own any of it anymore. At the very best, you would just be an agreed keeper of it. Think about Leonardo da Vinci's Mona Lisa. It's currently owned by the Louvre in France. Get rid of money and it stays right where it is. It belongs to everyone and continues to be kept in the same building. Then think about a privately owned painting. In a world without money, that stays right where it is too. If the person who currently keeps it wishes to, they give it to someone to have when they are finished with it, and that person is then its new keeper, and so on. And people could still swap stuff if they so desired, as long as both parties agreed the swap was fair. What happens if someone else has something that you really want though? I really like your table. Did you make it yourself? Yeah, it took about a week. If you want one, I scanned it when I was done. Here's the link, you can order one online. Oh, thanks. I know there would be people who wouldn't want to share their ideas or their things with others. That's fine. Again, where is the problem? I really don't think ownership is even the issue. I think the underlying issue behind the problems people see around ownership in a world without money actually stem from something else entirely. Strangely enough, I think this is the one area that most people have the biggest issue with, and I think the problems arise because of the intertwined nature of current social conscience and the socio-economic drivers of the world in which we live. People want to be better than other people and have a desire to flaunt that they are better. The sexual drivers of superiority are well known. Just like a peacock, the male with the brightest and biggest feathers gets the best mate. Money allows for the weaker members of a population to purchase the best feathers and thus alter that natural order. I get it. But if money was the only driver of competition and of that system, the poor people of this planet would never mate. Competition between humans will always happen in a million different ways, and anyone who believes that it will disappear if we got rid of money obviously would also assume that cavemen had no competition either. Money changes the way that those competition systems work, and removing money would change them again, not eliminate them. As for challenges in life, they are everywhere. If the only thing driving you to challenge yourself is money, I would suggest you are probably doing the wrong things. It is said that want lures us, need drives us, and mastery completes us. Challenge is a fundamental component of mastery, of any subject or skill, and without money, all humans are free of both time and the requirements of need to spend their lives in the pursuit of as many masteries as they wish. Never once feeling like we have taken the wrong turn in our lives when our frustration overcomes our desire to advance further, and allowing us the opportunity to make as many wrong choices as we want. Challenge and competition are massive problems in monetary systems because most people get but one chance to make those choices before necessity drives them away from their better path. And for that reason alone, getting rid of money is far and away the best thing that could happen to humanity, as frustration and perceived lack of opportunity are weights on a massive portion of society and lead to some of the most antisocial behaviours of our time. Medicine is easy. With no money and no patents to stop you, you make as much as is needed. That simple. Nobody dies for want of cancer meds anymore, and nobody has to buy out-of-date insulin off of eBay. As for healthcare, we already have machines that are learning to do surgeries. We have machines capable of doing both triage and diagnostics, and machines that dispense drugs as needed. Put serious focus on the technologies, and automating the vast majority of healthcare can be done quickly. What can't be done is the care part.
An elderly man picked up the phone last week and placed a heartbreaking call to 911. Turns out it was a wake-up call about a growing problem that has gone unnoticed. Here's Dr. John LaPook.
Clarence Blackman is an 81-year-old Army veteran battling prostate cancer. But cancer wasn't the reason he called 911.
What I need is someone
to get to the grocery store and bring me some food because I need to eat something.
We already have a crisis of care in the West. Elderly and social care costs are spiralling out of control, and the system just isn't capable of paying workers enough to care about the jobs they are doing. Money and profit is killing care for all. The only way to fix it is to give responsibility back to the people. We know there are selfish people in the West already. People who either pay for someone they don't want to care for someone else to deal with, or people who simply dump their relatives on anyone and leave without paying at all. The problem already exists, and it exists with or without money involved. But if you free people from their labours, if you reduce the cost of care and the medicines to support it to zero, you have to realise the situation can only get better. Because it sure as hell can't get any worse. As we've discussed already with clothing, most manufacturing could be automated and probably already would be automated if it wasn't for how cheap third world labour is. That's true for all sorts of manufacture. There are loads of television shows that follow complex items being created. And it always astounds me how few people are ever involved in those production lines. The next time you watch one, have a really good think about how easy automating the last few people out would be. And you'll get an idea for exactly how many people are truly needed in manufacture. None. And don't talk about bespoke items, because without money, there will still be people who will want to create things with their hands and with their minds. And getting rid of money will free all their time up to that, or even for you to make something yourself. You never know, you might be brilliant at it, but the job you need to make money in order to eat is holding you back from ever finding out. And remember, whenever possible, we use recyclable materials to produce everything. And it's all made to the very best design, using the very best parts to the very highest standards. Because suddenly nothing is designed to be obsolete next year or made from substandard components so you have to throw stuff away and rebuy it. Shops are simple. You just get rid of the barriers and the tills. Replace the shelf stackers with machines to do the same job. In fact, Amazon probably already has the world without money shop of the future. See something, order it online, and it gets delivered to your door by a machine. Bars are also easy. Get rid of the till and turn the counter around the other way. Help yourself. Now, one problem I've heard is that what if someone goes into a shop and takes all the 70-inch TVs, for example? What happens then? Well, firstly, a machine notices that they've all gone and places an order for more to be made and then delivered to the store. Then the person with 40 70-inch tellies gets home and realises how stupid they are, because the tellies are worth nothing, and having 40 of them only makes his life worth because he has to deal with them. With no worth, they are just clutter. I'm sure there would be people who would do it.
So why would people get in line to get food for the needy if they're not really in need? They're selling it. For how much?
So what? It hurts no one other than them. They'll learn. Greed doesn't work without money. People trying to be greedy would just be looked at like the idiots they are. In 100 years, we have gone from the first mass-manufactured automobile to the first mass-manufactured self-driving electric cars. If electricity is free from the sun, and if self-driving electric cars and trains are now a thing, how much do you think ground transport should actually cost? Transport almost takes care of itself, but there still needs to be a revolution in how we use transport. Rather than owning a car, we use communal cars, like a mass Uber system. You just book a transport method for a date and time, and then use it. We all don't need a car, we just have to have a large enough fleet to cover demand. Plus, if everyone is freed from work, what exactly will people need a car for? Transportation usage in the short haul will fall off a cliff. For long haul, as we've already said, we don't have electric aeroplanes as yet, so we use hydrogen as a jet fuel in the near term and spend time developing them. Or we create sea trains or other mass transport devices that have never taken off because we are controlled by rich petrochemical companies. What percentage of laws and crime do you think are related or attributable to money? And what do you think remains in a world without money? Robbery? Why? What are you stealing? It ain't worth anything. Robbery effectively disappears as a crime, and burglary the same. Blackmail, fraud, extortion, all practically eliminated. There's no money to be gained. Embezzlement. Of what? Really, the only crimes that would be left are classified as offences against the person. Murder, rape, antisocial behaviour, intimidation. And these are a matter of human nature and would occur no matter what system you had in place. According to a UK study, poverty or matters of wealth transfer account for 58% of all offences against the person. So you could only assume this situation would get a lot better. No, getting rid of money isn't going to fix this, but it's human nature. People and their emotions are always going to be a problem. Money doesn't need to add to them, though. As for laws, what's left? Someone asked me about law and how it would work without money, and after some thought, I think you just have to throw it all in the bin. You end up with 3 simple laws, I think. Possibly just modification of the 3 laws of robotics from Asimov. 1. A human may not mentally or physically injure another human being, or through planning, allow another human being to come to harm. 2. A human must respect the universal human rights of other human beings, except where such adherence would conflict with the first law. 3. A human must protect its local environment and the other life forms within that environment as long as such protection does not conflict with the first or second law. Once you get rid of money, and thus just about all concepts of ownership, everything seems to get remarkably simple. I'm sure I must be missing something there. Do you have any idea how many people work in the entertainment industry writing screenplays and novels for nothing? Tens of thousands. Do you have any idea how many entertainers make a proper living from their own industry? Not very many. In a world without money, you'll get an explosion of creative media because all that wasted talent that dreamed of making films or doing special effects but was trapped flipping burgers in Wendy's is freed up. And the vast majority of entertainers do it for the love of it, not the money. And if you think celebrity is dead without money, you're insane. Do you think people love Rihanna because of how large her last contract was, or adore Robert Downey Jr. because of the size of his bank balance? Celebrities would still be in existence. People would still make music, still act in plays, still be celebrated. Without money, everyone gets every tool they need to make their art as perfectly as they can. Studios just become bookable, just like houses and cars as we've discussed. Human emotive creativity would have its lid torn off and we would just see this amazing expansion of every type of creative art everywhere. It would be incredible. How many genius-level scientists spent their most productive years working on unbreakable glass for iPhones or better nicotine delivery methods in cigarettes, rather than curing leukemia or designing better electrical infrastructure? The amount of wasted genius on Earth can't be overstated. Either trapped working in fields that have no overall benefit to mankind just for the need of money, or never even utilised because they took the wrong career options. Einstein was working as a patent clerk. Imagine how many other people may have never freed their minds from their labours who could have changed history like Einstein. And again, just like entertainment, the vast majority of scientists are in it for the love of science. Definitely not the money. Without money, equipment for labs and experiments is built as required to the very highest standard. Scientists investigate what they are passionate about, not what pays the bills. Advances are focused on our problems, not on next year's trends. With money, science is controlled by the rich and powerful. Without money, science is only controlled by our imaginations. All advances would be shared instantly, benefiting all, and only real science would get done, because there'd be no profit in bullshit. Humanity's sheer thirst for knowledge would drive a tidal wave of advances, the likes of which we have never seen. It would be science on steroids. Talking about this one always makes me laugh.
Our enemies are innovative and resourceful, and so are we. They never stop thinking about new ways to harm our country and our people, and neither do we.
Donald Trump famously said he was going to drain the swamp when he came into power. It must have meant his backyard. If you really want to drain the swamp, get rid of money. Without money, there is no economy. Therefore, no budget. Therefore, no politicians. It's a dead profession, like banking. You don't need leaders. You simply have propositions voted on by people. We want to build a dam across the Wharfe Valley to aid farming in the region. Here are the pros and cons. Do you agree? Because the ideas are not linked to wealth and profit, you can decide without having to consider undertones. Just the facts. There's no selling of ideas anymore because nobody is lying to the populace to make a buck. It goes without saying that if humans are anything, they are usually armed, ignorant, and angry. But that's mainly because our lives are driven in a spiralling competition for resources. With the 5 things covered, what do you think anyone will fight over? Religion, maybe? The right to mate, possibly? But people do that anyway, with or without money. However, lack of water, food, or energy need not be reasons anymore. What if I still want to shoot a gun or own one? Well, go to a range and use one, or have one in a locker in your house. Nothing changes. We set up regions where guns are not allowed and regions where they are. You choose where you want to live, so you make the choice. Just don't be selfish and say you want to go somewhere that doesn't allow guns with your gun in your back pocket, okay? As soon as this topic comes up, everyone seems to get a little conspiracy on me. Oh, they'll never let you stop using oil, you know. Oh, they'll never let you use their copper. Palladium's really expensive, you won't get that from them. And all I say is, who is this they? Is this the they that doesn't exist when people attack conspiracy theories? Or is this some tangible they that we're talking about? Resources belong to the planet. If I'm reading the they right as used by people when discussing this, I believe we are describing rich, greedy people coveting and trying to hold on to resources that they no longer have rights to, which is an argument from greed at best. Resources would be used by the people of Earth to benefit everyone, not the few. And if everything is made recyclable, wastage stops. Plus, making stuff to the best it can be and as reliably as possible stops redundancy. Resources on a planet the size of ours are only ever an issue because of money and enforced scarcity. Also, it is thought that 30% of the precious metals ever mined are currently sat in landfills. This is why there is an actual industry in places like India where people mine rubbish dumps for their resources. We need to focus some attention on mining those areas for the resources they have, preferably with tech rather than starving children. Without money and the drivers of profit behind it, this really is a world of plenty. This is the biggest item of them all, where all of this starts and ends. Education is the foundation stone of all attempts to change. Think about it. We want to get people to stop using so many fossil fuels. Education. We need to get people to stop the spread of AIDS. Education. We have to change the way people use water. Education. We need to get the youth interested in politics. Education. 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 Everything humans have ever achieved started with decent, honest, quality education, and everything we will need to accomplish in the future will start from there as well. We need to get the educators and the knowledge holders of the world to share everything they've learned, to create the data from which we can all learn. This is already beginning. Websites like Masterclass would be the template from which all humanity post-money would learn. And we need to get state, business and education in the short term unlinked. How can any debate, let's say about the energy of tomorrow, ever be framed fairly if it's the energy industry that's driving and paying for it? It can. That practice needs to end. In the future, education will be whatever you want it to be. You could learn anything, from the masters of it, as and when you chose. No more fees, no more 9 till 5 learning, free, immediate, and however you consume it best. The West's education system was hastily put together sometime in the 19th century and is constructed to pump out good little mill workers and to daycare children whilst their parents work, with the irony being it hasn't changed much since we closed all the mills and adopted different working patterns. Education needs a massive overhaul, and the whole world knows it. Having an educated, questioning, engaged and impassioned populace is fundamental to the success of any society, and only once we rid ourselves of money can we ever hope to rebuild our education systems into the foundations of learning that drives the advances of the next millennia. I'm not stupid enough to know that they, whoever they may be, won't give up their perch at the top of the tree without coercion. There's a reason why the world is stratified, and that's so that people at the top can lord it over everyone beneath them. It's the way of kings, rulers, despots, and charlatans, and its day has come to an end. Gandhi managed to free India from British colonial rule without a fight. All he needed was the right impetus and enough willing souls. Well, the impetus has to be that the next monetary collapse could well be the last for the West, unless we do something drastic. And it won't be left for us to pick up the pieces. It will be our children and their children. We have a chance to make the world better, and it really doesn't have to hurt us as it happens. All we have to do is remember the power of the many. I'm reminded of the line, "No one raindrop is responsible for the flood. All of them together are." We need to understand, just like Gandhi, that together anything is possible if we act with respect and decorum. The transition away from money requires 3 initial steps and then around a 40-year period of preparation before that grand day arrives. Effectively, it would take just over 1 generation from today. In 1953, the leaders of the West descended on what was left of Nazi Germany for a one-of-a-kind series of monetary talks. 1 week later, the beginnings of a document now called the German Economic Miracle were laid, and in that document, swathes of the debts accrued by Germany during both wars were wiped clean, freeing the country from most of its imposed burdens. In order that society still functions during the transition away from money, all national and personal debts would have to be wiped out, and a similar organised and agreed freeze would have to be implemented on all stocks, shares, investment, bonds, interest rates, and other mechanisms of monetary control. This is so that stability can be brought to the system, so that the process of dismantling it can begin. Wages would also have to be frozen, and it's about this time the true nature of individuals would become apparent. We talked earlier about draining the swamp, and as soon as this process begins, the truly selfish people of the world would make themselves known. And strangely enough, the largest portion of those people are likely to come from those sections of modern society that call the poor lazy.
For that reason, we will soon begin the construction of a great wall along our southern border. The US Congress comprises of nearly 50% millionaires, and the UK Parliament about 15%, totally unrepresentative of their populaces. This is another reason why the system we have is broken. Money is now protecting money. You start a process of eliminating money, and how many of those people do you think would continue to have an interest in their work? Do you honestly think Donald Trump or William Rees-Mogg are putting 150% effort into their labours every day, knowing their status and power are gone? The swamp would drain itself long before you closed it down and converted it into a museum. High-end lawyers, overpaid bankers, the so-called heads of industry, they would all skulk off, leaving the real work to the masses as usual. The gravy train at an end. As soon as you realise that, you know the only reason they are in the positions they have now is to make you work so they don't have to. And it shows up the system we have in place for what it is. People have said to me, if you truly believe that, what are you doing with a job? And the response is simple. I don't have to like the game I am forced to play to know I must play it to the best of my ability for my family.
That's the problem with money. We are all forced to play a game we know is crooked to survive. It's modern slavery. So, once what's left of the altruistic parts of each government have organised and a date to begin has been agreed, a new Declaration of Independence, this time from money, should be drawn up. It should state the agreement reached, the imposed requirements on the populace, and the goals required to be attained for the transition to conclude. Day one of transition would look like any other day. People would wake, kiss their families goodbye, and go to work as normal. Everyone would still be paid for the work they do, and everyone would still pay taxes. If you didn't work, the system would act as it does now, and you would not be able to afford the essentials of life. To protect the vulnerable, and also because all debts have been cleared, taxes would rise so that social services could be approved across the board. The only thing that would change would be the manner of the jobs that were done. You would have just two major pieces of work going on. The first would be an analysis by everyone of whether their job was required going forward. And those people whose jobs were no longer required would be repurposed based on their skills into those fields where the most work was required. The second piece of work would no longer be profit generation. It would be automation. It would be focusing people on working so they never had to work again unless they wanted to. Imagine how productive and engaged people would be if they realised that the end result of their labours was complete freedom. There would be a joy that settled into people's working lives, not fear and stress as there is for many now. Automation would require machines, and generally speaking, you only need 3 types of machines. You need the main machines that do the specific task required or produce the specific item you wish. Then you need repair robots that are capable of repairing those specific machines. And then you need maintenance bots that can repair the repair bots and each other. That's it. No one robot fits all, no master AI, just limited AI set for a specific task, responding to guidelines given. I'm not getting into a discussion around the Fermi paradox and the Great Divide and why master AI is a hugely bad idea, so let's just leave that alone. Back in the 19th century, there was an uprising against the industrialisation of the north of England. I mentioned these people before, the Luddites. Well, those people torched mills and smashed machines that were taking away their livelihood, because that kind of progress stopped them being able to provide those 5 essentials of life for their families. Their jobs were automated. They couldn't survive. As you moved through transition and people completed their automation, a very different type of Luddite would appear. As people's jobs became automated, Luddite parties would be held, celebrating their release from indebted servitude, not fighting the machines that took their place. Automated jobs would still pay their workers, and freed people would be invited to help colleagues still labouring to finish their own tasks. A lot would not want to, but I guarantee you many would. In finance, only the most essential tasks to keep the system ticking over are done. No stocks are traded, no new flotations are made, no more Ponzi schemes are founded. The majority of finance workers leave the profession on day one and are moved to other roles. Their skills in managing and organising information put to good use. And slowly, the inventions to free ourselves roll in, and the automation of necessity nears completion. And right at the end, there's this sigh, like finishing a race on a very long road. And there's this gigantic party, like the greatest New Year ever. Humanity is free. And then what? Imagine a free humanity. Imagine a humanity connected and purposed in living life and enjoying existence. Imagine where our imaginations might take us. Imagine how those forefathers of this freedom might be remembered. Without money, anything we wanted to achieve would be possible because we would not be limited by money. People's dreams would not be hidden behind paywalls, their hopes and aspirations denied due to the contents of their wallets. You can't live your life afraid of change. Change has to be embraced, understood, and accepted. As always, all of this comes down to a choice. We push for the changes that could save this world or watch on as it burns. The next collapse of money is coming, and we have maybe one last chance to save the world from it, forever. We either choose to avoid that collapse or we bow down to our own apathetic cowardice. We are the first generation in history that has to look our children in the eye and explain why we knowingly left this world in a worse state than we found it, and why we squandered all the opportunities we were given to change that. But we don't have to. It's time to stop the cycle of money repeating. It's time to start cashing in.